that probably applies to lots of curatorial stuff too, right? It's not necessarily significant. It has some interesting historical associations, but it was on the back of the site, and there was lots of controversy. Neighborhood people loved it. Historic preservation people, some of them loved it. The city wanted us to keep it. We looked at moving it. We looked at keeping it on site. And I remember telling the director at one point, you know, from a historic preservation perspective, I said, if we move this thing to another location on site, which was the idea at one point, which was to move it to face the park Evans Way and reuse it as the entrance, I said, that's just, from a historic preservation perspective, it's one of the craziest. I personally think stuff like that is just kooky, because it may have had significance because of its context, but now it's totally gone. You're misrepresenting what the site was, and now you're using it as some sort of strange object. People are going to be confused when they come to the front door about what it was. Frankly, most people don't know or care, but they could be. So I said, if you do that, you can count me out. I don't want to be part of the project. And I think the next day there was a board vote, and the board saw this, and they said, we love it. And it was funny because right before the vote, they asked me my opinion. I said, I gave that, this little historic preservation explanation. They said, oh, that's interesting. Let's do it. So fast forward 5 years, Renzo said, this is kitsch. We can't reuse it. That's stupid. And in the flash of an eye, you should keep an eye on the model. Where did the carriage house go? They're so fun. The keep an eye on the model is such a funny idea. Keep an eye on the model, because there's stuff that you think is in there. It'll disappear. It'll come back. You'll ask for it, where to go. It comes back. It's so funny. This building over here, this long, narrow thing, had a green roof for a while, and one of the architects, our project architect, hated it. And I'd always say, what happened to the green roof? What green roof? What do you talk about green roof? I don't know anything about it. Anyway, here's the architecture piece. I shouldn't be talking about the carriage house and whether it makes sense or not. Renzo should be doing that. So the board had a dialogue with Renzo, bing, bang, boom, carriage house gone. And it solved the problem. One more quick one. This one's even funnier, because in the back of the Gardner, there are these funny, very domestic spaces, and part of our project was how to reuse them and how to get back into the building from the new facility. And this was the back. This is what back of the house spaces look like. And Renzo said, he was explaining to us at a meeting that I want to make a new brick cloistered vestibule that you come into, because that's what will connect you to the historic brick cloisters. And I, of course, said, well, the back of the building is really sort of domestic, and it's plaster and different materials, and why would you extend the cloister to the back of the building? It doesn't really make sense. It's a weird, made up version of something. And he said, in front of the board, he said, Jim, you are too smart for this problem. Well, I took it as a compliment, of course. You're right, Renzo, I am too smart for this problem. And here's the brick vestibule that was created. And it actually works. Some of these guys are who they are for reasons. He got the brick vestibule right. You'll see, I think you're coming to the site tomorrow, so you'll see this as well. Very quickly now on gallery. I had mentioned to Alan Chong, we had the gallery in our project, interestingly, had bounced around for a while. It was on the first floor. It had moved to other locations. At one point, talk about appropriate place for input, our building is lots of things. It's visitor space, it's public space, it's storage, it's mechanical rooms, it's administrative space, it's a performance hall, it's a gallery, it's a cafe, it's all kinds of things. So where does a curator appropriately plug into that? Now, God bless our director, she loves to have meetings with the curators and get all their ideas and then give them to me. These were the ones that I was most interested and concerned about. Alan Chong, way back when Renzo was trying to stuff the gallery into the first floor in the back corner somewhere, Alan said, I thought you like to work with light. He said these very subtle things about, why is the gallery there? And in a major redesign at one point, Renzo came up with this idea for a bit of a laboratory as a gallery. It's a cube with a movable ceiling and an elevation of glass that has three-part shade system that can go various degrees of dim out to wide open to blackout. So from a program perspective, it met all kinds of things. From an architectural perspective, it did fabulous things. Now it gave us 2 program spaces, the performance hall and the gallery on the second floor, two jewels. They sort of define the building in ways that we never imagined. This view out of the gallery created new relationships with the historic building. This is a Renzo idea. None of us said, hey, Renzo, I got an idea, programmatically speaking. Let's have a giant gallery that's a cube with a movable ceiling with a glass elevation so we can stare at the palace. What a great way to create a relationship with the historic structure. This was totally out of his brain. So, you know, a completely new dynamic idea meeting our program, but took the overall project, you know, to a completely new level. And the other thing this does, when you think about all those funny lines that we're trying to join up, this gets, you know, brings money, it gets donors on board, it makes happiness throughout the institution as you're trying to drive to a goal. The most interesting thing about, you know, just this is me talking about things that you know a lot more about, but I think one of the interesting things that happens with this gallery, this is sort of an interesting photo, it's taken off the top of the historic building, is, you know, the gallery is kind of, I joked about curating curators, you know, in a way the gallery has become now this object on the site, and it's, no matter what is in there now, the whole gallery now is a little bit of a show in an interesting way because you can actually see it from the tapestry room in the historic building, and you can look back into the gallery when these windows are used. But I think in the end, you know, the gallery, like the rest of the building, owes its success probably to the participation of the client, the architect, and client includes, you know, I joke about the curatorial input, but I think it was critical as long as it's clear and there's a path that's defined that's appropriate. And I think in our case it was through the director, because then you have one strong voice from the client. We ran into a lot of trouble when we would, you know, Renzo would come to the meeting and he'd say, you know, I was just talking with, and you could just insert the staff member, and, you know, he would be off, you know, on some tangent where we'd spend, you know, a week or months pulling him back. But this is the final product, and we owe a lot both to the curators that participated, the board, and certainly to the architect. They did a great job. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so envious of, of my two co-presenters to be where they are, because at the Harvard Art Museums we can just taste that finish line, but it's still 2.5 years out. And it's been, as many of you know who's followed the saga of our attempts to renovate and expand the Harvard Art Museums, a very, very long process that's been full of fits and starts, including the idea that we actually originally hired Renzo Piano before he won the Pritzker Prize, just to give you some sense of how many years this has been in the works. What you see projected in this slide is the side view of where the historic 1927 Neo-Georgian old Fogg building will meet the Renzo Piano addition. And as I mentioned, it will open in the fall of 2014. I wanted to take a step back in time before focusing on where we are with our project, because I think it was a number of years ago that this group was updated by Helen Molesworth about where we were then, which was before the financial meltdown. And that was when we thought we were on the fast track to a new museum in Allston that was to be designed by the LA firm of Daly Genick. And it was going to be a museum of modern and contemporary art that would help us represent a kind of focus on that program that we had never been able to do in the historic building. The idea was that it would anchor the expansion of the university into its new Allston campus, that it would have a kind of relationship with the community that was different from the more university-focused relationship that the old Fogg building had, and that we could use that building while the Quincy Street building, the Fogg building, was being renovated. We could sort of all shoehorn in there and have something of a program in the intervening years. So it was meant to be a kind of step program. if this project had gone forward and if it had been built on schedule, it would have opened about a year ago. So just again, to give you a sense, 5 years ago, that's where we were. But of course, what happened was the meltdown, and at first things slowed and then things really stopped in Alston, and we had to regroup. We weren't going to be part of, certainly not first in the ground for the expansion to Alston. And the new president, Drew Faust, really wanted to take a step back, not just for financial reasons, but also because she really wanted to think about the university's relationship with the arts, what had been the legacy of the university's engagement with the arts over its history, and really found it wanting relative to our sister institutions. And so she convened a task force on the arts, which in December of 2008 issued a report that, you see just a blurb from the cover of that report here. It's actually fascinating reading on many different levels. But the key point here was this push, this goal, or this mandate to make the arts an integral part of the cognitive life of the university, to think of the arts as an irreplaceable instrument of knowledge, to really to put it in a kind of dynamic relationship with other ways of understanding the world, of critical thinking, of visual literacy, of looking, and trying to frame that not just within the practice of the disciplinary lens of art history, but also very much through the practice of art making, through the intelligence of artists and their voices. And this report came out around the same time that Harvard was redoing its general education curriculum, and so there was a kind of perfect storm of interest in revitalizing the way in which the arts played in the university's curriculum. That began to make us think at this moment, frankly, of crisis within the art museums. What are we doing now that we're not going to Alston? Are we really going to be able to renovate this building that gave the term deferred maintenance, made it almost a joke to think about how, really the condition of the building, we couldn't stay, we had to go. And in some ways what that allowed us to do in retrospect, and it was, we had a year or two there where we had serious discussions and thinking and debate among the curatorial staff and our director and among the rest of our colleagues at the museum about really what is this new mandate, what is it going to mean for us, how can we take this sort of moment of crisis and really turn it into something for ourselves. And we began to rethink what could the Quincy Street site be that as a university art museum in a city with great civic museums that allows us to really be a university art museum in a kind of profound way. We don't have to do double duty the way the Yale University Art Museum needs to, for example, really serving its community. And of course our community is important to us and we want to do that. I don't want to say the museum is only for the students, but the rest of the resources of the city allows us to do something differently, I think. And with all the other building going on, I think that that was important to us as well, that we wanted to define ourselves differently. So guided by that mandate, we began to think about what would a reinvented Harvard Art Museums look like if the model of our predecessors, the kind of Paul Sachs model of the Fogg Art Museum was as a laboratory. How could we become a kind of multi-platform teaching machine for the 21st century? What would that mean in terms of curatorial practice? What would that mean in terms of the architecture itself? So listening to what Jim had to say about the importance of being a strong client, I think that, and Elliot about really articulating where you want to go, what is your vision, and keeping your eye on that. And making sure that everybody understands what that vision is and all the steps that have to be taken to get there. That we really began to think about, okay, what are permanent collection galleries in a university art museum? What other kinds of galleries might be there that can serve the curriculum, assuming that we also want teaching to happen in our galleries? What is a temporary exhibition for a university art museum in terms of the way in which it might interface with the curriculum, with faculty, with student engagement? What are the opportunities for mentorship, not just within, again, the field of art history, which is where we're most closely aligned, but with a broader disciplinary engagement? So with all that in mind, we sort of began to hunker down and articulate different kinds of programmatic goals for Renzo and his team. We also had some limitations to what we could do that were based on history and legalities, and also, to some extent, desire on the part of the art museums. So thinking of core goals for the program, it was important for us, this was the first time that our three component museums were going to be under one roof, the Fogg, the Busch-Reisinger, and the Sackler museums. And it was important to us to take advantage of that opportunity of coming together to bring our collections into better dialogue, while at the same time, we needed to respect the identity of those three component institutions. So it was a bit of a dance going on, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that as we go through the slides. We also received, we did a lot of strategic planning early on and got visitor feedback not just from our general community, but certainly from our university audience. And one of the things that we sort of realized about ourselves as an institution is that we always thought we were sort of eclectic and interesting because we did these very focused exhibitions and you could go from sort of one extreme to the next, from gallery to gallery. And what we heard back from our visitors was that they had a very incoherent experience and that they were seeking coherence. So this idea of, sort of this expectation of a visitor of entering the door and having some sense of art history unfold before you was actually something that we were hearing that we weren't achieving. And so we wanted to address that. Also, the Harvard Art Museum's collection, while it's comprehensive, is not encyclopedic, and there are whole swaths of the globe that we don't, where we haven't historically collected. Africa, certainly pre-colonial South America, just being two examples, but Harvard collections are rich in that material. So we wanted to think about ways that we could bring some of that material into our display galleries that would not become tokenistic, that would have a kind of real presence, that would have a voice in the program. So being willing to give over part of your program to material that's not part of your specific permanent collection for a kind of greater end. We also, very early on, decided, and these were the paper curators, so I can speak for myself and also for Susan Dackerman and Bill Robinson, decided very early on that rather than wanting to have designated paper galleries, we wanted to have prints, drawings, and photographs integrated into the permanent collection galleries, and to find a sustainable and interesting way of doing that. And that when we did temporary exhibitions, we would do them in the new temporary exhibition space, as would any other curator in the institution. It was very important to us to articulate what we thought was, and to be able to express in our program what is distinctive about a teaching museum. As we walk through, I'll sort of touch on some of the ideas that we have come to this point, but I'd say that one of the great opportunities I have speaking on this panel is already learning lessons from Jim and Elliot. Also, we spent a lot of time thinking about what is it that we want the works in our collection to do. That we have all of these goals, but in many instances our collections aren't going to be strong enough to tell those stories. So we have to guard ourselves against trying to tell narratives where we don't have the work that's strong enough to tell those. Don't just put in the third-rate thing because it's the only thing you have. Find a different story to tell. And so that's become a kind of constant refrain in the process of reinstallation that we've been working on. And most of all, we just wanted to reflect in everything that we did the core values of close looking and critical thinking. So what you see here is a computer rendering of what really will look largely unchanged from what you always knew, which was the protected 1927 Neo-Georgian facade at the corner of Quincy and Broadway. And then the new second entrance to the building, which is the Renzo addition to the space on Prescott Street, which is the entrance for the Busch-Reisinger and Sackler museums. The building has 6 floors, and on the lower level you can see a large auditorium that fits just shy of 300 people, a 100-person lecture hall, a 35-person seminar room right here. A studio space, which is for art making, a public education library, and offices and storage down below. I should back up for just a second. There is actually, because we can isolate the program on the lower level from the galleries up above, there's actually an entrance that's on grade right here. But the two major entrances bring you into the courtyard. And so you may remember that the courtyard of the past had a kind of ley light that separated it from the program up above, and what Renzo has done is to open it. What this will allow is for the courtyard to be used to orient visitors, but also you'll be able to see through the multi-layers of the program. The galleries, the study centers, the conservation area will all be visible as you walk through and circumnavigate the building. So listening to our visitor feedback, what we did, I think we achieved this about 2.5 or 3 years ago now. We decided to, by and large, do an inverted chronological installation of the collection, just as a kind of armature, although there's plenty of exceptions to that rule, even on the first level. This is the Prescott Street entrance, and the Sackler Museum needed to sort of assert its identity in this quadrant. The Busch-Reisinger over here, and the Fogg collections here. But I have to say, with the loss of the Alston Art Center, we began to actually think of this quadrant as a kind of stand-in for the contemporary program for the Alston Art Center. So even though technically we were trying to achieve the kind of identity of three institutions, we really almost did it for four. One of the reasons that we decided to invert the chronology was simply a matter of building architecture. Like many sites, we are in a very tight and constricted site, and the height of the original historic building determined the height of the new wing. Happens to be that the ceilings on the first floor are a foot higher than the ceilings on any other floor, so we needed the extra height for contemporary art. So you'll have the classic Busch Modern collection, the Wertheim collection, moving into early modernism, and then from mid-century through contemporary art on the first floor, and just some, sample objects to give you a sense of that. The central stair and passenger and freight elevators go up and down all 6 floors, and as you come out of that circulation core, on this level, again, the courtyard orients you, and you can either go back into sort of medieval Asia to the Islamic world on one side, or the medieval West to the Renaissance on the other. Circumnavigating the old Fogg building are galleries that move from the 17th to the 19th century. And then the third level of galleries, again, coming up the circulation core, are ancient galleries around the courtyard, and in these 4 radiating galleries. And the conceit of our ancient curator was that art that was shown outside in the ancient world will be around the courtyard spaces, and those that were in burial or domestic spaces are in the radiating galleries. On the third level, in the back of the building, we've given over 3,000 square feet of a 4,300 square foot gallery program to specific curricular use, and then about a 5,000 square foot temporary space next to it. So that will be a very dynamic part of the building. So by about 2010, we had settled on this distribution, and by September 2011, last September, we had come up with a kind of rough design of the galleries on our own. We then decided it was really time for us to engage an exhibition designer, and at first we thought we actually might work with Renzo in that capacity, but after visiting a number of projects that he had done and thinking about what we were trying to achieve, we began to rethink that, and the deal was sort of sealed in a way when Stefan Wolahojian was involved in a project at the Pulitzer Foundation called Old Masters at the Pulitzer. Ideal Displacement, which is about the issue of old masters, the display of old masters in contemporary spaces. And Emmy Pulitzer had asked one of the principals of why architecture, an LA-based architecture and design firm, Kulipat Yantrasat, to help her organize that. And some of the key issues that were really raised by that symposium, that conference, were how do you create in a contemporary building a space for historical material? How do you install art in those kinds of spaces and adjacencies where, where dialogues really matter and do something, where the architecture isn't overwhelming them? How does issues of, light, which is so important in contemporary architecture, impact the visitor experience of art? And it was really a kind of profound experience. Tom and Stefan and I were together at that, and we spent a lot of time talking, and it couldn't have happened at a better moment in terms of our planning. And just to give you a sense for some of Y's work that we then sort of learned about their own architecture. They had recently done the Grand Rapids Museum, which was the first LEED Gold building, which you see on the left. And then we learned that they had been doing a lot of galleries at the Art Institute of Chicago, and indeed, we had gone to visit Renzo's work at the Art Institute to check it out and see what the problems and the benefits were. And as we were going through the spaces, we passed the Japanese galleries, and we all sort of stopped and said, whoa, who did that? And it turned out it was Kulipat, and that he had also installed, everything from their Japanese galleries to their colonial American galleries recently. So last summer, we hired Y Architecture, and we began to work with them. And I have to say that this idea of prototyping, if you're in the middle of a project or contemplating a project, is just incredibly important. And some of the things that we've done have happened, I am completely willing to confess, as much by happy accident as by intelligent plan. And one of them was our delay of the building. So that we originally thought that Susan Dackerman's great Prince in the Pursuit of Knowledge exhibition was going to close the Sackler building. So we deinstalled the fourth floor of our, kind of compressed run of the history of art on the fourth floor. And we were prepared to do that and to put her show up, and then the building was going to close. But then all of a sudden we realized we were going to have another 18 months of a building. So what were we going to do with it after that show came down? And so we began, at that point we were enough along in our planning that we said, okay, well, let's just use it to test out some of these ideas that we have for a program. And so if you go today to the fourth floor of the Sackler, what you'll see is that it's not the most coherent visitor experience, but we're really learning a lot from it in terms of what we need to know for the new building. So understanding that we were giving over all this additional space for curricular use, we decided the largest curricular gallery we had had before was something like 400 square feet. So we increased it to 1,000 square feet. We compressed the run of pre-19th century Western art to an even smaller footprint, and I thank my colleagues for, for doing that and doing it brilliantly. And then also we thought, okay, well, that we have some really wonderful exhibitions that we didn't think we were going to be able to host at our own facility because of our reduced footprint, and maybe this will give us an opportunity to do it. So for example, right now, Laura Muir's fantastic Lionel Feininger photograph exhibition, which is completely sublime, is installed in that temporary space after its triumphal run first in Europe and then at the Getty. So working with Y, this is a rendering for the 19th century, which is this is sort of, we're sort of here looking into a suite which, chronologically starts from here, of the work we did with Y. And so some of the things that we were doing is sort of playing around with the inclusion of works on paper, of the juxtaposition of different objects, but also prototyping different case design, especially cases that would allow us to integrate works on paper into the display of the Western tradition. So lectern cases, easel cases, cases with drawers, just trying to understand what would they mean in our context. We really hadn't done that before. So where are we right now with this project is that we've been working with Y first on that fourth floor project, but then very intensely on our permanent collection galleries since the fall. This is a recent photograph of the building, which is now rising up. and rising up enough so that we're able to actually get a hint of what some of these spaces look like. So here we are.